The wind howled through the streets of Millbrook, Connecticut, as the last of the autumn leaves scattered across the cobblestone market square. The morning was crisp, and Emily Parker skipped along beside her parents, eager for their weekly Saturday tradition. As always, the market was bustling with life, the scent of fresh produce and spices filling the air, vendors calling out greetings, and familiar faces exchanging smiles. But this Saturday, something was different. A rustle in the shadows between the stalls caught Emily's sharp eye. She froze. A German shepherd, once proud and noble, sat alone, his fur matted, ribs showing through the thin layer of skin. His amber eyes, once filled with purpose and strength, now reflected a deep sadness. Tied to a metal post by a frayed rope, he was clearly forgotten, abandoned by the world that once relied on him. Emily's heart skipped a beat. This dog needed help. "Mom, Dad, look," she whispered urgently, tugging at her parents' sleeves. Her voice was steady, but her eyes spoke volumes of empathy far beyond her years. Welcome to HeartForce channel, where you and I find more meaning in life through stories about dogs. Before we continue, please comment below and let us know where you are listening to this video from. And if you have any stories about your dog, feel free to share them with everyone. David Parker, a civil rights attorney, instinctively reached for Emily's hand, concern growing in his chest as he saw the dog. He had heard the stories, the ones that had made the rounds in town about the dangerous police dog, who had once been a hero but had now become a symbol of fear and mistrust. Emily, however, wasn't afraid. Her soft blue eyes met the dog's gaze, and in that moment, she saw beyond the scars, beyond the past that had unjustly marred his reputation. She saw a hero. "Please, I think he's just sad," Emily said quietly, her small hand pointing toward the dog. "He needs us." David hesitated. He recognized the dog, a local K-9 hero named Thor. He had once been part of the Millbrook Police Department's K-9 unit, saving lives in floods, fires, and rescue missions. But a tragic misunderstanding during a fire had turned the community against him. It wasn't just the dog's story that had been twisted, it was also Michael Bradford, the officer who had once worked alongside Thor, who had been forced to give up his best friend. Thor had gone from being a guardian angel to an outcast. But Emily wasn't deterred by the whispers of fear. She crouched down, slowly moving closer to Thor with a grace that spoke of her natural ability to connect with animals. She remembered everything her parents had taught her about empathy and kindness. Slowly, she lowered herself to the ground, making herself small to avoid scaring him. "Hi, Thor," she whispered softly, her voice a gentle melody over the noise of the bustling market. Thor lifted his head, his gaze locking onto hers. For a brief moment, there was something in his eyes, a flicker of hope, a spark of recognition. He was still the dog who had once rescued countless lives, the dog who had protected his handler and others with unwavering loyalty. But now, in the cold reality of his abandonment, it was clear that he had lost his way. Yet, something about Emily, something about the purity of her heart, called to him. "He's not dangerous, Mom," Emily said, her voice filled with certainty, not a trace of fear. "He's just been hurt. He needs someone to show him love again." David stood frozen for a moment, torn between the fear that gripped him, the fear of taking a risk, of taking in a dog with a history so clouded, and the love that filled his daughter's words. He glanced over at Sarah, who had been observing the scene quietly. He could see the familiar look in her eyes, compassion, understanding, and, most importantly, a deep trust in Emily's instincts. "You're right, sweetheart," Sarah said softly, "but we need to be careful. This dog has been through a lot." Emily looked up at her parents, her eyes pleading. "Please, I promise, he's a good dog. I can see it in his eyes." Sarah turned to the vendor, Mr. Chin, who had been watching the exchange. He stepped forward and nodded slowly, his voice quiet but firm. "She's right," he said. "I've seen him for weeks now. He's been treated badly, but he's never hurt anyone. He just needs a second chance." Emily gently reached in her pocket and pulled out an apple, her breakfast that she had saved for later. "Are you hungry, Thor?" she asked softly, her heart aching as she watched the dog's weary gaze follow her every movement. Without waiting for a response, she broke the apple into pieces and slowly extended her hand, offering it to him. Thor hesitated for a moment, and then, with a careful grace that reminded Emily of his former heroism, he reached out and took the apple from her hand with a gentleness that spoke of a spirit still intact despite the trials he had faced. "See," Emily whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "You're not alone anymore." The crowd that had gathered around them was silent now, all eyes on the small girl and the broken dog that had once been a symbol of strength. Emily had already begun to weave a new story for Thor, one filled with compassion, healing, and the power of second chances. And Thor, for the first time in months, began to believe in it. The days that followed were filled with an unsettling quiet. The air had grown colder, and the vibrant energy of Millbrook streets seemed to drain out of Thor with each passing day. Despite the community's attempts to offer him solace, whispers of his past followed him like a shadow. Thor, once a beloved hero, now sat bound by the same rope that symbolized his fall from grace. No longer the canine officer who had saved lives, he was now the dog that had attacked during the school fire. As the weeks passed, Emily continued to visit Thor, bringing him apples, petting him, and speaking to him softly. At home, her thoughts were consumed by the dog. She couldn't shake the image of his sorrowful eyes, nor could she ignore the deep sense of injustice she felt for him. Emily had an innate understanding that Thor's pain wasn't just physical. It was a soul-deep wound, a trauma that only time and love could heal. She didn't fully understand the complexities of the world or how she could help, but she knew one thing for sure: Thor needed her. She spoke often of Thor at dinner, recounting stories of their encounters at the market. Her parents listened carefully, each word weighing heavily in their hearts. David had always been the practical one, quick to weigh the pros and cons of every situation, while Sarah, with her background in psychology, could understand the emotional depth of the dog's suffering. But Emily? She saw only the good in Thor. To her, he wasn't a dangerous dog or a criminal waiting for punishment. He was simply a guardian who had lost his way. The turning point came one evening as Emily's parents sat in the living room, a conversation quietly unfolding between them. "We need to do something," Sarah said, her voice quiet but filled with resolve. "Thor is more than just a dog. He was a hero, and I think Emily sees something in him that most people can't." David paused, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "But Sarah, the whole town is afraid of him. He's become a symbol of fear, not trust. What can we do?" Emily, overhearing their conversation, wandered into the room, her small hand clutching a drawing she had made earlier that day. It was a picture of Thor, his strong frame, his protective stance, but this time, she had drawn him with a golden halo above his head. Her little fingers had carefully shaded in the lines, her love for the dog evident in every stroke. "He's not scary," Emily said softly, holding up the picture for them to see. "He's a hero. He saved lives, just like in the flood." She paused, her eyes wide with an innocence that carried the weight of truth. "He just needs someone to show him that he's still good." David's heart sank. He had always prided himself on being logical, on seeing things for what they were. But in that moment, something shifted. His daughter's conviction, her unwavering belief in Thor's goodness, pulled at his heartstrings. He couldn't ignore it anymore. The next Saturday, they returned to the market. The atmosphere was slightly different this time. People were still wary, eyes lingering on Thor as they passed by. But Emily had a new sense of purpose. She wasn't just there to visit. She was there to do something. As they approached Thor, her heart pounded in her chest, but she stepped forward without hesitation, just as she had the week before. Thor looked up as she approached, his amber eyes meeting hers. His posture was still one of resignation, but there was something in his gaze, a flicker of recognition, a hint of hope that hadn't been there before. "Thor," Emily said, kneeling down in front of him. Her voice was steady, filled with the love and compassion that had defined her from the start. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out the apple she had saved, and gently offered it to him. "Are you hungry?" The moment was profound. The crowd, who had watched with suspicion the week before, now found themselves drawn to this simple exchange. The dog, once seen as dangerous, now looked at Emily not with fear, but with understanding. He took the apple with the same gentleness he had shown her before. And in that small act, something began to change. "You see," Emily said, her voice breaking the silence, "he's not dangerous. He's just sad. He just needs to know someone cares." David and Sarah stood behind her, watching as the community around them began to soften. The vendor, Mr. Chin, who had secretly been helping Thor for weeks, stepped forward and nodded in agreement. "She's right," he said quietly, his voice carrying an air of quiet wisdom. "This dog has been through a lot. He's not dangerous, just misunderstood." Emily's confidence was growing, and so was the support of the people around her. They didn't fully understand Thor's past, nor the trauma that had led to his downfall, but they could see the bond between him and Emily, pure, unbroken, and filled with an innate understanding. As they stood there, Emily whispered to Thor, "Don't worry, I'm going to help you. I'll make sure everyone knows who you really are." The simple truth in her words struck the crowd with such force that the air seemed to still. This wasn't just a little girl speaking. It was a soul filled with compassion, standing up for what was right, seeing the truth when others could only see fear. That afternoon, the Parkers made a decision that would change not just their family, but the fate of a dog who had been cast aside by a community that had once celebrated him. Emily, with her heart wide open, was determined to fight for Thor. And in that fight, the entire community would learn the most important lesson of all. Redemption is possible, and love is the key. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions. Thor's once tragic story was now taking on a new narrative, one where redemption was no longer just a hope, but a living, breathing reality. Emily's parents had agreed to take the next step in helping Thor. With her gentle persuasion, Emily had softened their hearts, but now they were committed to a path that would change everything. It wasn't just about giving a dog a home. It was about offering him a second chance at life and proving to the world that even those who have fallen the hardest can rise again. The Parkers had never imagined that a simple act of compassion would lead to so much. The community, once divided over Thor's fate, began to rally behind Emily and her quest to help the dog who had once been a hero. As word spread about Emily's dedication, more and more people started to speak out. Local businesses, vendors, and even school children who had seen Thor's gentleness during past visits began to offer support. They all saw the same thing Emily did. Thor was a victim of misunderstanding and fear, not aggression. Despite the growing support, Emily knew the road ahead would not be easy. Thor had endured so much: physical trauma, neglect, and the emotional scars of being judged unfairly. But Emily was unyielding. She had seen in Thor what no one else had: a heart of gold, a quiet strength, and an unwavering desire to protect. One chilly Saturday morning, as Emily sat with Thor outside the market, she noticed a familiar face approaching. It was Mr. Chin, the vendor who had quietly fed and watered Thor for weeks. His fruit stand was only a few stalls away, and he had watched with a mixture of sorrow and concern as the dog's spirit had slowly eroded over time. "Miss Emily," Mr. Chin called out, his voice soft yet full of determination. "I've been thinking a lot about Thor. I never once saw him act aggressively, even when people were cruel. He just needs someone who believes in him." Emily nodded, her heart swelling with gratitude. She had spent so many afternoons sitting with Thor, talking to him, and reassuring him that things would get better. But Mr. Chin's words struck a deeper chord. "He's more than just a dog," she said, looking up at the elderly man. "He's a friend, and he's been through a lot. But I believe he can heal. I believe he can be a hero again." Emily's words had a ripple effect. More people began to take notice. It wasn't just Emily's fight anymore. It was the community's. They had all seen what she saw. They had all heard the stories of Thor's past and recognized the injustice that had been done to him. It wasn't just about saving Thor. It was about changing the way the world saw redemption, healing, and second chances. But as the support grew, so did the opposition. A cloud of uncertainty still hung over the dog's future, and the legal battle to reclaim him from his previous owner, James Miller, was far from over. Miller's neglect had been documented, but there were still legal hurdles to overcome. And with the stigma attached to Thor's past, there were still people who believed the dog was too dangerous to be trusted. David and Sarah knew the fight would be long and difficult, but they also knew they couldn't back down. Emily had already proven that love, compassion, and unwavering belief in another being could move mountains. They would support their daughter in every way they could. One evening, as Emily sat in her room drawing, she paused to look at the pictures she had created over the past few weeks. They were filled with scenes of Thor, his noble face, his fierce loyalty, and his quiet strength. Emily had started a new project for school, a report about rescue dogs and the power of second chances. But it was more than just a project to her. It was a way to help people understand the importance of giving others a chance to heal, to grow, and to find their purpose once again. Her drawings were accompanied by notes that detailed Thor's past, his heroic acts, and the love he had shown to the people who needed him most. The photos of him carrying a baby to safety, the video of him rescuing children from a collapsed building, these were all part of his story. And Emily was determined to make sure everyone knew it. "Daddy," Emily said one night as she walked into the living room where David was sitting at his desk, papers spread out in front of him. "I want to make a sign for the market. It'll say, 'Thor is a hero, not a villain.' I want people to know the truth." David looked up from his work, his heart swelling with pride. Emily's conviction, her determination to change the narrative, was something he hadn't expected. But now, seeing how much she believed in Thor, he understood that this fight wasn't just about proving the dog's worth. It was about proving the value of empathy, understanding, and love. "That's a great idea, sweetheart," David said, smiling warmly. "We'll get it printed tomorrow. You're doing more than just helping Thor. You're teaching everyone what it means to stand up for what's right." As the weekend approached, Emily and her parents prepared for another visit to the market. Emily clutched the sign she had made, carefully drawn in bold letters, ready to share Thor's true story with everyone who would listen. When they arrived at the market, Emily stood beside Thor, her little hand resting gently on his back. The sign she held high said it all: "Thor is a hero, not a villain." As shoppers passed by, many stopped to read, to look at the dog who had once been a symbol of fear but was now being redefined by the power of one small girl's belief in him. And that's when it happened. The crowd began to shift. People who had once crossed the street to avoid Thor now came closer. They saw the sign, and they saw the dog in a new light. It wasn't just about the stories of his past. It was about the bond between Emily and Thor, the way the dog had transformed from a broken soul into something much more. As Emily smiled up at her parents, her heart swelled with pride. The journey wasn't over, and the road ahead would be difficult. But with each passing day, she was helping to rebuild the reputation of a dog who had saved lives, a dog who had been misunderstood, and a dog who was now on the path to healing. And for Emily, that was all that mattered. But despite their growing support, the battle was far from won. James Miller, Thor's former owner, had filed a claim to regain custody of the dog, and the legal proceedings were becoming increasingly complicated. David and Sarah had been preparing for the hearing, but the pressure was mounting. Every day, they worked tirelessly to gather evidence, seek out witnesses, and prepare for what was sure to be a difficult battle. But Emily's resolve had never wavered. She continued to visit Thor every Saturday, her heart steadfast in her belief that he was more than just a dog. He was a family member, a hero who had given everything for the community. She knew that no matter how hard the fight, they would win in the end. It was during one of her visits to Thor that something extraordinary happened. As Emily approached the market that Saturday, she noticed a familiar face waiting for her. It was Mrs. Rodriguez, the owner of the flower stall, who had been one of the first people to notice the mistreatment of Thor. Mrs. Rodriguez had been an advocate for the dog from the beginning, quietly documenting his neglect and speaking out when she saw the opportunity. Now, she had something to share with Emily, something that could change everything. "Emily, I've been talking to the others, and we've all decided that we need to do more," Mrs. Rodriguez said, her voice soft but filled with determination. "The town is starting to see Thor in a new light, and we want to make sure his story is told the right way. We've collected pictures, videos, and testimonies from the vendors. We've even talked to some of the children who remember him from school events. We're all behind you and Thor, and we're ready to help however we can." Emily's eyes widened with surprise and gratitude. She had always known that Thor had touched the hearts of those around him, but to hear that the community was ready to stand by him in such a tangible way filled her with hope. "Thank you," Emily said, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "I'm going to keep fighting for Thor, but I know I can't do it alone. This means everything to me." Mrs. Rodriguez smiled and patted Emily gently on the shoulder. "You're not alone, child. We're all in this together." And so, the legal battle began to shift. The Parkers, with the support of the entire community, filed their case with renewed vigor. Emily's story of Thor, the hero who had been misunderstood, spread like wildfire. News outlets picked up the story, and soon, the entire town was behind them. The rally in support of Thor grew larger, and the voices of the community began to speak louder than ever before. The night before the hearing, Emily sat by her bed, clutching the stuffed dog she had held since she was a little girl. Thor's face had become a constant presence in her life, even in her dreams. In her dreams, she saw Thor standing proudly, wearing a police badge, leading children to safety, and receiving the recognition he had long deserved. "Daddy," Emily said quietly, her voice soft but filled with certainty. "I know we're going to win. Thor belongs with us. He's part of our family now. He's not just a dog. He's a hero." David looked up from the papers he had been reviewing, his expression one of quiet pride. He knew that his daughter was right. He had seen the way Thor had transformed from a broken soul into something more, something that was once again worthy of love, respect, and honor. "Tomorrow is a big day, sweetheart," David said, his voice filled with warmth. "But no matter what happens, we've already won. Thor has already shown us what true courage looks like. And you, Emily, have shown us what it means to believe in something bigger than ourselves." The next morning, the family prepared for the hearing. It was a cold and gray day, with the first hints of winter creeping into the air. They arrived at the courthouse early, surrounded by supporters who had gathered to show their solidarity. Emily clutched her drawing of Thor, the one she had made in the courtroom-style game she had played with her stuffed animals. It was a simple drawing, but to her, it represented everything she believed in. It was her way of showing the world that Thor wasn't just a dog. He was a hero who had saved lives, and he deserved a second chance. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense. The opposing side, led by Thomas Miller, James Miller's brother, presented their case with cold efficiency. They argued that Thor's past was too complicated, that he was too much of a liability. But as they spoke, Emily felt a sense of clarity. She wasn't fighting for a dog. She was fighting for justice. She was fighting for the truth to be heard. When it was their turn to speak, David stood tall and addressed the court. His voice, usually calm and measured, now carried a note of passion. "This dog saved lives," he said, his eyes steady. "He didn't attack anyone. He didn't harm anyone. He acted in the heat of the moment, just as he was trained to do. What happened that night was tragic, but it wasn't Thor's fault. And I believe he deserves a second chance. He deserves to be with the family that has come to love him." As he spoke, Emily felt a quiet sense of peace wash over her. This was more than just a legal battle. It was about Thor's legacy. It was about showing the world that no one, no matter how broken or misunderstood, should ever be discarded. The moment that followed was nothing short of transformative. Emily stood up, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't scared. She was ready to do what needed to be done. She walked to the front of the courtroom, her drawing of Thor held high in her hands. "Thor is a hero," she said, her voice clear and unwavering. "And he deserves to be part of our family." The room fell silent. The judge, who had been listening intently, looked down at Emily and then at the drawing in her hands. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of Emily's breathing. And then something shifted. The room, filled with so many doubts, began to feel lighter. The truth had been spoken. The courthouse was quiet as the judge deliberated, the weight of the decision pressing down on everyone in the room. Emily sat with her parents, her heart racing as she clutched the drawing of Thor she had brought with her. Her small fingers trembled as she held it close, but her mind was clear. She knew, without a doubt, that Thor belonged with them. He wasn't just a dog, he was family. Outside, the wind had picked up, swirling autumn leaves around the courthouse steps. The tension in the air was palpable as supporters from the town gathered, waiting for the verdict. It wasn't just about Thor anymore. It was about the community coming together, rallying for what was right. They had all witnessed his transformation, his healing, and they had all seen Emily's unwavering belief in him. Thor wasn't just the dog who had been misunderstood. He was the dog who had taught them all the power of second chances. Finally, the doors to the courtroom opened, and the judge entered. The room fell silent as everyone stood to attention. The judge took his seat, his eyes scanning the room before he turned to Emily. "Miss Parker," the judge said, his voice soft but firm. "This has been a difficult case, with many perspectives to consider. But after hearing the testimonies, seeing the evidence, and witnessing the bond between you and Thor, I believe it is clear that this dog deserves a chance to live in a home where he is loved and cared for." The room held its breath as the judge paused, then continued. "I am ruling in favor of the Parkers. Thor will remain with his new family, and I hope that his story will serve as a reminder to all of us that we must look beyond the surface, beyond the labels that others put on us, and recognize the true potential within." A wave of relief swept over Emily and her parents. The battle was over. Thor had won his second chance, and the world had finally recognized him for the hero he truly was. Tears filled Emily's eyes as she turned to look at Thor, who had been patiently sitting beside her, his head lowered, but his eyes bright with hope. She knew that their fight was far from over, but this was the moment they had all been waiting for. When they left the courthouse, the crowd outside erupted into applause. Vendors from the market, neighbors, even children who had once feared Thor, now cheered for him. Emily smiled up at her parents, her heart swelling with pride. She had done it. They had all done it together. That night, as the Parkers gathered around their dinner table, Thor lay at their feet, his head resting on Emily's lap. The family had come together, not just to rescue a dog, but to rescue a piece of themselves. They had learned the true meaning of love, not the kind of love that demands perfection, but the kind of love that sees beyond the scars and recognizes the potential for healing and growth. Emily turned to Thor, her small hand gently resting on his fur. "See, Thor," she whispered softly, "heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they have fur and 4 legs, and sometimes they just need someone to believe in them again." As the firelight flickered in the corner of the room, casting a warm glow over the family, Emily's words hung in the air like a promise. No matter what happened next, no matter how difficult the road ahead might be, they had found something truly precious, a bond forged not in perfection, but in love. And that was something that no one could ever take away. Thor's tail thumped softly against the floor, a small but powerful reminder that he had found his place. But by the love and acceptance he had found in the hearts of those who truly understood him. The journey had been long, but the healing had begun. And for Emily, that was the most important lesson of all, that love, in its purest form, could heal even the deepest wounds. And it was through that love that they had all been transformed. The journey of Thor and Emily is a powerful reminder of the importance of second chances. In life, many of us have been misunderstood or hurt, but through love, compassion, and belief in one another, we can find healing. Emily's unwavering faith in Thor teaches us that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is to show love and empathy, even when others may have given up. The story is a call to see beyond the surface, to offer second chances, and to believe in the possibility of redemption and transformation. And let us know how you've seen love and compassion make a difference in your life. And don't forget to subscribe to the HeartForce channel for more heartwarming stories like this one.